Daniel, 31 days. That's how long it took to completely reshape the American presidency. The story of William Henry Harrison isn't just about the shortest term in office, it's about how one man's death transformed our democracy forever.
PAPPY. You know what's fascinating about Harrison? He basically invented modern political campaigning. The whole log cabin and hard cider image was entirely manufactured.
That's right. Here was this wealthy Virginia aristocrat, son of a Declaration of Independence signer, pretending to be this humble frontier hero. His campaign literally rolled log cabins through parade routes and handed out hard cider at rallies.
And it worked brilliantly with that catchy slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler Too, though the story behind that nickname is pretty interesting.
Well, the Battle of Tippecanoe wasn't precisely the glorious victory it was made out to be. Harrison's forces were actually caught off guard in a pre-dawn raid by Tecumseh's Confederation. The Native Americans only retreated because they ran out of ammunition.
So another case of history being reshaped for political purposes?
Exactly. And speaking of reshaping things, let's talk about that fateful inauguration day. March 4th, 1841, the longest inaugural address in American history at 8,445 words. 2 hours in the cold rain without a coat or hat.
Though the White House itself wasn't much safer, right? The conditions back then were pretty terrible.
Oh man, you wouldn't believe it. The executive mansion in 1841 was essentially a swamp adjacent building with poor ventilation situated near open sewers. Harrison insisted on working long hours in these conditions, even as his health declined.
And that's what led to the first major constitutional crisis about presidential succession.
Right? Because the Constitution only said the vice president would assume the president's powers and duties. It didn't specifically say they became president. John Tyler basically had to assert himself as the actual president, not just an acting one.
So, what exactly did Tyler do to establish that precedent?
He immediately moved into the White House, took the whole oath of office, and insisted on being called President Tyler, not acting president, or Vice President Tyler performing presidential duties, even when his cabinet resigned in protest and critics mockingly called him His Accidency. He stood firm.
That's quite remarkable when you think about it. One man's interpretation of the Constitution shaped every presidential succession since then.
And it wasn't formally codified until the 25th Amendment more than a century later. However, what's truly interesting is that Harrison's campaign tactics had an even more immediate impact on American politics.
The whole idea of crafting a specific public persona for campaign purposes.
Exactly. The 1840 campaign established a template for modern political marketing featuring catchy slogans, campaign merchandise, staged events, and the notion that a candidate needs to appear relatable to the average voter.
Though Harrison's last words seem pretty ironic now. Sir, I wish you to understand the true principles of the government. I hope they will carry it out. I ask nothing more.
Those words take on a different meaning when you consider that his death forced the country to figure out one of the most fundamental principles of our government: how power transfers when a president dies.
So, in a way, his most significant contribution to American democracy came not from his actions, but from how the system had to adapt to his absence.
That's exactly right. And you know what's really fascinating? Every time a president has died in office since then, whether it was Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, or Kennedy, the transition has been smooth because of what happened in 1841.
It really shows how sometimes the most significant impacts on history come from unexpected places. Pappy.
And that's the real legacy of William Henry Harrison, Danielle, not just as the president with the shortest term, but as the man whose death forced America to confront and solve one of its most crucial constitutional questions. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal the gaps in our system